Welcome to Horns Up. I'm Peter.
And I'm Animesh.
And also welcome to Horns Up, Tom Templar of the UK-based heavy metal act, Green Lung. Hi, Tom. Hey. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, guys. Pleasure to be on. And I think this is my first interview in India, which is really nice because I've been several times.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. But, today we're talking about your upcoming album, Black Harvest. And right off the bat, I must ask you, how does it feel to have new music releasing soon?
It's exciting. I mean, obviously, like everyone else in the world, we spent 18 months in lockdown, basically. And I guess for us, as a sort of younger-ish and rising band, lockdown hit us pretty hard because we had a whole year, 2 years almost planned of festivals and shows and tours. And, I think we were worried that, what if you've got a whole buzz around your band, it's a very rare thing. We're all musicians who've been playing for years. And this is the first band where that's really happened. And so we spent lockdown recording this album, writing it. And, in the last few months, we've sort of come out of the cave and started playing shows again. And that buzz is still there. I think it's sort of come back. And I think there's a lot of expectation and excitement about the album. And for us, it's a sort of big celebratory thing now. It's more than just a second album. It's a sort of fuck you to the pandemic. It's a sort of, sort of coming out and playing music again, playing shows again. And that makes it all the more special, really, than just another album.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I've been following you guys for a while, ever since you all released your EP, and I'm here in India, right? So I kind of noticed that you guys were like on the clock, kind of, how things were back in the 70s and 80s. Every year there's a new release coming out. So I must ask you, did it feel strange not to release anything last year?
Yeah, you're right. Like I think I joined the band and 3 months later, we cut our first demo. And then that autumn, we released Free the Witch, our first EP. And then I think a year later, we did the album. So we have been pretty prolific for a band that's only been going for 4 years. And it was, you're right. The first sort of year we hadn't come out with anything. But I suppose what changed that slightly was that we switched labels and reissued Woodland Rights with our new label, Svart Records. And that was really nice process because we remastered it and a whole bunch of new people came to it, I think, who'd never really, fucked with us before. So it was just really, it was just a really exciting experience, which made it feel like we had released something, even though we hadn't. But you're right. I think we all have a work ethic, and we like putting stuff out. And Scott, who's the guitarist, and me both sort of come from a punk background, even though we play heavy rock. And I think that's probably where the sort of trying to do an album every couple of years or every year kind of thing comes from. And yeah, we've already got a few tunes sort of kicking around for the next thing. So hopefully, fingers crossed, you never know what's going to happen, but hopefully that sort of keeping an album every couple of years thing will keep on going, because that's how we like it.
Okay, so let's get the elephant out of the room then. The last year, no album, how much of that had to do with the pandemic?
I really was trying not to write like a pandemic album, because I think, it's such an obvious thing for heavy metal bands in a pandemic. It's like the perfect subject. It's the kind of theme that heavy metal bands dream about. Like, everyone else is terrified, but we're like, we've been thinking about pandemics and plagues for years because we love heavy metal. You only have to like pick up a thrash album to sort of be fully acquainted with the concept of a pandemic. In truth, I think there's one song, maybe 2 songs that were sort of written after the pandemic. Most of them had been written before it and was being finessed. There's a song called Doomsayer, which is a really sort of heavy stoner rock song that our keyboardist John wrote the riff for, which is quite unusual. And that was written quite late. And I think that was the only song where lyrically I didn't want to sort of tackle the moment we were going through. I wanted to do it through sort of folklore and the idea of, you know, a doomsayer in the medieval times who would, you know, proclaim doom, but actually this time it's kind of true. But actually, you know, that song is kind of touches on the plague, I guess, but it also touches on climate change and some other sort of big themes. So it's not like we wanted to just write, here's a sort of album about our time in the pandemic. And I think, you know, a lot of it's quite escapist. It's about sort of trying to conjure up a world that is far away from the current moment. And it's a sort of, that's something I always like to do with Green Lung. It has a sort of world it inhabits. Like when I'm writing songs, I'm thinking of them as like little short stories about that world. More than I'm thinking, okay, let's try and commentate on the present world, because, you know, there's a lot of bands that do that and it gets pretty boring. I don't know about you guys, but like I find it a bit po-faced sometimes, you know, if you're trying to write, this is the one song about the pandemic.
No, fair enough, because like, you know, while you're saying that, earlier today, while I was on YouTube of all places, like coming across music, I came across a band, and here's it, COVID Deck to Me. No prizes for guessing it was a brutal death metal band, and I was just like, wow.
That's amazing. I hadn't even thought of that. I guess there's a whole new world of medical terminology for Carcass's next album. They must be chuffed. Yeah. Everyone's way more familiar with lots of obscure medical terms, actually. Maybe death metal bands are looking over their shoulder a bit and having to sort of get a bit more obscure.
Yeah, like how do you top Carcass? Like COVID Deck to Me.
Vaccine metal. That's the next big thing. Truly gives you a shot in your arms.
Yeah, man, exactly. Shot in the arm. There's a whole, yeah, there's probably a COVID metal is a whole thing that is about to happen. And it's going to be funny for about 4 minutes.
Yeah. But coming back to Black Harvest, right? I mean, I read in one of your earlier interviews, and this is when you released Woodland Rights, where you described your vision for the album as, and I'm going to quote you, deep and heavy doom, but uplifting that makes you want to party and move your body. I think you probably remember that, but now that the album is close to release, do you think you've met that vision?
That's interesting. It's always funny to have stuff quoted back to you like you've said in the past, because, you know, usually I'm talking a load of shit and I'll probably listen back to this and think, what was I talking about? But actually that is kind of true. I think it's kind of, you know, this band is two guys, you know, it's in terms of like a lot of the creative writing. It's me doing the lyrics and the vocal melodies, and it's Scott writing the bedrock of most of the songs, and the solos and the riffs. And you know, I come from a background which was much more sort of heavy doom. My first band was called Tomb King and was like properly super cryptic, heavy electric wizard worshipy doom. You know, I wasn't singing, I was just sort of screaming.
Hang on,
and,
I must interrupt you. Did you also have like robes and things like that? I must know.
I wish. I don't think we played like maybe 3 shows, and we were teenagers, and we were just awkward, weird teenagers. We had a whole idea that we were going to make this sort of like the sort of doom metal equivalent of Nile, like proper like Egyptian tomb metal, but we never got around to doing any of it because we broke up. but you know, so my field of reference when we started this was that I wanted to do that doom band and do it properly, not that exact concept, but, you know, I wanted to do a proper doom band. And so like you know, my references were everything from Trouble to bands like Witchfinder General, the sort of original wave of Sabbath worship bands in the 80s, right up to bands like Reverend Bizarre and Electric Wizard. And so my lyrics were, you know, influenced by those bands. But then Scott loves all that stuff too. But, you know, oh, can you still see me? Yeah. Scott loves all of that stuff too. But I think he writes, you know, melodic hard rock a lot of the time, just down tuned to drop C, putting like loads of heavy sort of breakdowns and stuff in it. The riffs are heavier, but, you know, a lot of the choruses a lot of the melodies come from big uplifting stadium 70s rock, like everything from, I think even people forget that Sabbath were, a huge band who played to millions of people and was seen as like a big pop band at one point. And but Scott loves, everything from Queen to Boston or something, like he's way out on that hard rock thing. So what you're hearing there in the sort of this is doom but uplifting is kind of two guys, one of whom loves doom, one of them who loves hard rock, sort of meeting in the middle and sort of making this sort of heavy melodic hard rock doom, which we sort of accidentally sort of landed on. But people seem to love it, and I think it's a lot more interesting than just doing a standard hard rock band or a standard doom band. So that's kind of what I was saying in that interview. And I think this album is more that even than Woodland Rites, because I think we've become more comfortable with that. And like, we see that as what's interesting about Green Lung. I think we both aspire to write towards that now, whereas maybe we were trying to write in separate directions a bit at the beginning of the band. If that makes sense.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, what's also interesting is when I was reading the press release that came along with the promo copy that we got, right? It mentioned that this album was recorded over the course of 2 weeks at Giant Wafer Studios, which is in the rural mid Wales. Very jealous, yep. By the way, considering we live in a congested Bombay. But it was also done with your longtime producer, Wayne Adams. Now,
that's right.
As somebody who's heard your previous albums and been following you, correct me if I'm wrong, all your previous releases were recorded in under a week. So compared to that, 2 weeks seems like a luxury, right? Did that have an impact on the recording process at all?
I think it did. I think, we'd always, it was basically, it was never our intention to sort of, run in, record a whole album in 4 days. And it was stressful, when we recorded Woodland Rites, it was sort of very much like, get there at 10 a.m., work until 6, and then the producer would be like, okay, I'm done. And with the success of Woodland Rites and having a proper label, which we didn't have when we were recording Woodland Rites, really, we were afforded, a lot more time to just sort of fully immerse ourselves in the album writing process. I think there's a real difference between running into a studio, laying down a lot of first takes, basically, and then running out, versus, being there for 2 weeks in a place, soaking up the atmosphere of that place, being able to sort of experiment and sort of things happening that you haven't planned. I think that's always a big difference. So in terms of, it was a really different way of making an album. But I think what we didn't want to do was sort of get so, have so much time that we ended up making the wrong decisions and lose actually some of the urgency and the sort of punk attitude. So we did actually do a lot of this, what you're hearing on Black Harvest is still a first take or whatever, but actually it's because we were doing a lot more expansive stuff, because Scott was tracking, however many hundreds of harmonized guitar tracks. It was still a kind of a rush, and it was still pretty economical in terms of what we were doing. When you look at hard rock bands in the 70s, which is kind of the template for what we do when we're trying to modernize it, they used to, Deep Purple would shack up in a hotel in the south of France and write an album over a course of a month. And that's why a lot of those albums sound so fulsome and interesting and have so many like different elements to them. And it's why Led Zeppelin albums sound like a mixture of like a folk band with a hard rock band with a blues band, because they're recorded in different places over a long time. And we were trying to capture some of that with the time that we had. And if you gave me 2 months to record an album, I'd probably say give me 2 weeks, because I think 2 weeks is perfect. It's enough time to have experimentation and enjoy yourself and immerse yourself. But it's also, you're not going to end up with a lot of sort of weird proggy noodling and sort of songs that go on forever and half-baked ideas that you came up with in the middle of the night when you'd taken some magic mushrooms. You know, there's a sort of perfect limit. Like when you look at the Smashing Pumpkins in the 90s, you know, being sort of sent to make Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and it's just like total mayhem, psychological trauma. Or that, you know, the Happy Mondays or the Stone Roses, those 90s bands who just got given by their labels, like, okay, here's like, you know, a couple of million quid. You can record in the Bahamas forever. And none of those albums are any good.
I was going to say, otherwise then you'd end up like the Oasis, right? Like the brothers don't even want to look at each other anymore.
Exactly.
So how many of these songs then have been written or have been a product of experimentation as such in the studio versus how many of them were fully prepped up and ready to be recorded as soon as you step foot into the studio?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, we're one of these bands who just demo almost identically to what we're going to record in the studio before we go into the studio. We're kind of a bit OCD. We're not like, let's just go in and jam. That's just not our vibe, because so much of it's about the songwriting. It's actually, which is kind of counter to a lot of Doom. A lot of Doom is about atmosphere. We're trying to do atmosphere and really crafted songs. So they're very demoed, but what happens is, like, for example, on a song like Black Harvest, which is an instrumental, we had that worked out where it had an organ intro. And then we found this really weird string instrument, like a Chinese, what would you call it? I don't even know what you'd call it. It was like a maybe 4-string, not a guitar, luty type thing, in the basement of the studio. And we plucked out, it just sounded really weird and like creepy and almost folky. And we just plucked the notes individually and recorded them of that sort of original organ intro, and then processed it into this really creepy, it sounds like it's almost falling apart. It sounds like something really ancient and just sort of, kind of has tons of atmosphere. So it's sort of moments like that where you're going, okay, we know exactly what we're doing here, but how about trying it in this different way? There's a couple of moments in the vocals where, you know, Wayne, our producer, will go, okay, Tom, that bridge just doesn't pop as much as it could. And there was an example of that on this album where he was like, I like it, but I don't love it. And I was just sort of singing in the shower the next morning and came up with a melody which fit the lyrics, but sort of worked better. And that's what made it onto the album. So it's not like we're totally like, this is it. We're happy to listen, but it's got to, you know, we're also really happy to sort of say fuck off if it's a bad suggestion. It's kind of, you know, I think you've got to keep slightly open-minded, and that's where interesting things happen. But we're pretty heavy on the demos and sort of working out in the practice room beforehand. There's not much room for error.
Alrighty, so cool. So we've spoken so much about Black Harvest. Let's play a song from it. Pick a song and we'll play it. But first, tell us why you're picking that song.
Why don't we start off with this is a new song from the album that I absolutely love. It opens up the second side in a way. It's based on, it's probably the most like Woodland Rightsy song on the album, I think, in a way, but it feels like even bigger and heavier than that album. It's based on a Hammer horror movie called Dracula AD 1972, and some of the lyrics are actually taken from this Black Mass scene, which is pretty much my favorite scene in any horror movie, where Johnny Alucard, who is the main sort of villain of the movie, is sort of sacrificing a hippie in a joke Black Mass, which suddenly turns out not to be so much of a joke. And it's called Upon the Altar.
You dreamed of power, you lost it for fame.
I'm just putting this out there now. I'm going to quote you quite a bit because I read quite a few of your interviews.
Go for it.
Another one which kind of stuck out, a quote that you said was, I've never really seen us as a stoner rock band. And, as somebody who heard the EP and then Woodland Rights, I could kind of see that. But I was mentioning to Animesh before we started recording, like the moment I heard Black Harvest, I was like, hey, what are these guys up to? And is like Black Harvest like a conscious first step to move out of the stereotypical, and I'm going to use the air quotes, stoner rock sound?
It's not conscious. No, I think we're always just doing what's fun and what we love, and trying to write big melodic hard rock doomy songs. But I think it was with a band name like Green Lung, like we knew that was going to help us get on stoner rock shows and stuff, but it was also about nature, and it had more to it than just being like we smoke a ton of weed, because like truthfully, like maybe 3 of us regularly smoke weed. There's probably 2 guys in the band who just do not smoke weed at all. And
there goes half your fan base. Like, oh my God.
Yeah. But I don't care, because it's like, and not everyone smokes weed. I think doing weed and mushrooms to our band is a really good decision. I'm much more of a hallucinogens guy myself. I think both the first EP and the album, you could argue that they were stoner rock, and that's because they're descended from big hard rock bands like Black Sabbath, which basically every stoner rock band rips off. There's a funny thing, like we have one song I think that has the weed reference on it on our first EP. That's it, and it's a really like small one. And the thing that the band is most themed around is like folk horror and a sense of horror in the landscape and in nature, and but there's no such thing as like a folk horror band, like really. So it's easy to call us doom or stoner rock, and that's fine. Like if you want to call us a stoner rock band, who gives a shit? Like you can call us what you like. You can call us a bunch of cunts and I won't be upset. We're just making music. but I think it's kind of a useful thing sometimes, because it's an umbrella where you can go, we're putting on a stoner rock festival and we're going to do like Electric Wizard and Weed Eater and Bongzilla and Green Lung or whatever. And actually loads of those bands are like, they're all over the place. Like stoner rock is a really broad and hazy sort of genre. And if it brings people to heavy rock music, great. It's just that I don't really want to be singing endless songs about how much I love bongs, because I last smoked a bong in probably like 2011, and it was actually a bong shaped like Yoda's head, which I think is a real stoner cliche. But I'm more of a joints and mushrooms kind of guy.
You're also a punk rock kind of a guy, right?
Yeah, man, I love loads of like any heavy music put in front of me and I'll like it. But I have a huge soft spot for that. And as someone who wasn't like musically gifted at school or like classically trained or anything, I remember like listening to hardcore when I was like 13, maybe Minor Threat, and just thinking, holy shit, I could be in a band. And like I think without punk, I wouldn't be in a band, because like Scott is like a virtuosic guitarist, but I'm just like a chancer who picked up a mic one day. And I think that's punk rock. Like it's very inspiring.
Now here's a hypothesis that I've kind of been working on over the last, I don't know how many years now, but I've kind of found that fans of punk rock, especially like old school punk rock and hardcore, as you said, Minor Threat, excellent. Like I think this is the first time we are name dropping Minor Threat on this podcast, but that had to be done sooner than later.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. Huh?
Yeah, right. But so the hypothesis is that fans of punk usually end up wanting to play slower, doomier, stonery kind of music. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think you're onto something, man. Like Scott used to play in a death metal band and play like death. He used to just do like shredding Chuck Schuldiner solos, and he was like a tech death guy. When he was like 17, he was full tech death. When I was 17, the band I was in, like I was in bands that played really slow doom, and I was in like really speedy hardcore type stuff. Um, but yeah, I think you're right. Like I notice a lot of like one of my friends, Jack, used to be in an Irish hardcore band who toured Europe and were pretty big in the Dublin scene. And now he's wearing like Earth t-shirts, and it's like, okay, man, like it's interesting. Like I think you're right. Like everyone gets to the age of 30 and it's just like, oh man, I'm so sore. I'm just gonna get on stage and nod slowly.
Like I was thinking about it, right? When Animesh was saying this, you've got guys like D. Lorien, right? I mean, like fucking Napalm Death,
Yeah,
and then he goes on to Cathedral. You've got someone like Greg Anderson.
yeah.
This is crazy how like
Or
they
yeah,
transition.
Jay Massis, who was in super speedy like grindcore bands before he was in Dinosaur Jr.
Yeah,
Like I think it's like, yeah, Lee Dorian's a really good example.
yeah,
He's such an interesting guy because he's a big inspiration for me, Lee Dorian, mainly because he can't really sing and he loves like and he's just punk rock as fuck, but he's also like really into like he's just like a crate digging record nerd who's just like taught me so much about 70s rock just by like following his Instagram or like just reading the liner notes to Cathedral records, ever
yeah.
since I was really young. That was kind of the band that got me into this music totally. Like I remember seeing Cathedral support Cradle of Filth really early on.
Wow, that's an
In my
odd
That's a
lineup.
very
Yeah,
odd pairing.
yeah, but I remember going and being like, oh yeah, fucking Cradle of Filth. And then watching Cathedral, I was like, oh, I like that a lot more. Let's get involved in that. And like, look, here I am still at the age of 33, still into Doom. And like, I think that was a really interesting moment for Doom because like Cathedral went on tour with like him and Cradle of Filth. And like those bands were just paying back like their respects, I guess, to, you know, a band that had inspired them and taking them on tour with them, and like they were kind of a classic band. And but it helped people like me who were like at that point like 14 years old and basically got into heavy music through like Jackass, CKY, him, Cradle of Filth, some bands that I probably we shouldn't admit to like being into, but like seeing Cathedral support them, it was like shit, there's a whole different world. And then you end up at like an Electric Wizard gig or an Orange Goblin gig, and then you just go down the rabbit hole. So
Yeah, yeah.
he's I think he's like, he doesn't get his due credit actually for what he's done for heavy music with Rise Above Records as well. Like Lee Dorian, full on legend.
True. Completely agree. And just to make you feel at ease, we've discussed new metal because that was my gateway into metal. So yeah, you're fine. Trust me.
Dude, I got weirdly back into new metal recently. Like there's something like I was at a party and someone put on the first Korn record and I was like, this is genuinely
Wow.
sick. Like, and you kind of forget, and we listened to Slipknot's first record when we were recording Black Harvest, and they were like, yeah, this was actually pretty good. There's a few bands who I probably wouldn't go back and yeah, yeah.
I know where you're going with that. But
But
coming back to Black Harvest, right? I really love the cover art. And I must say this because
cool.
a lot of times, like with current music, right? Because everything is digital and you're streaming and stuff, bands are just kind of, winging it with digital artwork, digital manipulation, and all of that. What's cool about the artwork for Black Harvest is it's stained glass. So tell us about that. I mean, what was the kind of brief that you guys had, or was there a brief
Yeah,
at all?
no, yeah, we always so we work with Richard Wells, who's this amazing artist who I found through his work for TV. Actually, he made a film poster for a reissue of The Wicker Man, which I just loved. And he doesn't like heavy metal. He likes like indie rock. He loves folk horror movies though, and that's the thing. Like he's an artist that no other metal band uses, but he totally understands where we're coming from lyrically. So it just clicked. Like as soon as we did Woodland Rats, we were like, okay, that's the perfect cover. Like you've nailed the band, because we didn't really know how to represent ourselves until we saw that. Like we'd used some cool photography and stuff, but I think until Richard did that cover, it just suddenly all clicked, and it started. I think art can really help a band. Like Iron Maiden, what would Iron Maiden be without those jackets? You know, what would yeah, there's loads of examples. What would Motorhead be without Snaggletooth? You know, it's that sort of thing. And with the stained glass, it was weird. I had a totally different concept in my head when we were going into recording, which was based around this sort of creepy folk mask that we'd been using in the promo shots and for the cover for Leaders of the Blind, which was the original concept for the album art. But when we were recording the album, we broke into the local church because it was just left open.
Wow.
It was the middle of winter, and we recorded some of the vocals at the beginning of the album just there. We just imposed them
The
and
one in
used
the
the
Harrowing,
church
right?
organ. Yeah, that's recorded.
Thank God you guys are not a black metal band.
I mean, I kind of think like if the priest had come in, he probably wouldn't have been too keen, because I was like singing some chant about Woden, the pagan god. but actually, I remember thinking, like, looking at the stained glass window, wow, wouldn't it be interesting? Like we used woodcuts, you know, like in this medieval art form for woodland rites. And it'd be cool to rather than just do another woodcut, which is the original idea, why not try and appropriate another form of religious art that was from back in the medieval sort of period, which was stained glass, you know, like the ultimate expression of religiousness without sort of TV and film for a medieval person was seeing the sun shining on an incredible stained glass window, and to corrupt that and turn it in on itself, and sort of there was something sort of really satisfying about that and also the album was so sort of technicolor, you know, it was really colorful and interesting and sort of had lots of different sounds and wasn't just doing one thing. And it was like stained glass, I don't know, for some reason it felt more psychedelic. So stained glass has this sort of psychedelic quality to it as well. So when you get the first edition of the album, it's actually die cut, so the windows are cut into the vinyl sleeve, and then underneath the booklet is what's showing through, so it sort of works as a real window. And I love that stuff, you know, like
Yeah,
it's a lost art, like with vinyl, like there's people are coming back to vinyl because it's this true representation of the album, you know. It's not just a thumbnail, as you say. It's not just like a little thing you scroll past. And every album we make, we want to take people on a journey. We want to have a side A and a side B. We think like vinyl's the format we're thinking of when we're making this music. We're not thinking about Spotify. And it's great if people listen to us on Spotify, but the ultimate experience, if you want to listen to Green Lung, is by buying the vinyl, because that's what the albums are crafted around, that format. That's what we care about. And we have to have art to match it, you know. You can't just, yeah, as you say, have some stock image with you've taken off Getty Images and like manipulated a bit and put some text on. It's just boring.
Wow. You know, hearing that really kind of emphasizes for me the whole relationship between, you know, the cover art and the music. It takes me back to like flipping through CD racks and going through music and just discovering it through the artwork. So I hopefully that's what happens for somebody. But I have one more question about the artwork, and I'm very curious to know. So you've got these 4 figures, right? Other than your main mascot, who I'm going to ask you about later also. Who are those 4 figures supposed to be? Is that the band? And what's the inscription below it? Because I Googled it and I got nothing. So I have to ask that.
So it's pretty simple. It's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's death, famine, and plague. And it's the Latin inscriptions of what those would have been back in that period. It felt like the name Black Harvest was the album's title for quite a long time before we recorded. But with the pandemic and everything, it took on a new meaning. And I think, yeah, that was really where we sort of lent into, you know, because you are marking a time. Like we were holed up in rural Wales during a pandemic. We couldn't leave the recording studio really because it was technically lockdown. And you kind of want, you know, for when I look at that album cover, it reminds me of going to that little Welsh church and being in the middle of this mad fucking event. And I think that's another nice thing that comes out of going to a specific place to record an album because it can't help but be a document of that time in your life and the creative process involved. So yeah, that's that one out of the bag.
Excellent. All right. So, getting back to the release of Woodland Rights, I mean, this again stems from an interview that we read in which Scott had said, and I quote, "We do everything ourselves, from commissioning art and design to driving ourselves around on tour." Has that changed since you guys got signed on to SWAT Records? How much of the DIY methods still remain?
The only thing that's changed is the driving. We've got a guy called Sam, who we love. Shout out to Sam Tidman, best driver in the galaxy, and we love that guy. Yeah, I mean, we do everything. I will never ever relinquish control of the art. And
why does that matter? Why does that matter to you guys? Why does it need to be DIY in this day and age?
Because I think this is the age of DIY. I think small record labels, as much as I love some of them, are kind of becoming more and more irrelevant, because if you're offered a deal where they take all your royalties, they want to take, put you under an option for 3 records, and they want a piece of your merch, and all they're giving you is putting you on Spotify. Like, anyone can sign up to DistroKid for 15 quid and upload something to Spotify. We did it for our first 3 albums. We're still getting full royalties on on Woodland Rights because we did that. And there's a real weird thing where it's usually impressionable 18-year-olds walk into a record company's office, and then the record company can go, sign away your life and your creative life. We tell you what to do. We want this bonus track. We want, and actually, no, it's art. It's not a thing by committee. I don't know why anyone would aspire to that, especially from metal or punk. Like, metal and punk is outsider weird art. It's supposed to be personal. It's not supposed to be cooked up by a committee of slightly jaded guys. I think also, if you're not in control of your album art, that's one of the most fundamental parts of a record. A record isn't just the music on the grooves. It's the art, it's the package, it's the name of the band, it's the lyrics, it's everything. And, a lot of the records that when you walk into a record shop and you're 16 and you're like into heavy metal and you see like Venom's first record with like Satan smiling and this insane logo, you're like, oh shit, what the fuck is that? When you walk into a record and you see King Crimson's The Crimson King and this like face in writhing pain, you go, what the fuck? There's no text on that. What the hell is that? Like, I don't think record companies are worth getting into bed with unless they're paying you a fuck ton of money and they're risking that money. Or like with SFART, we have a deal where we share the profits and they let us, publish onto Bandcamp. They are connoisseurs of vinyl. I've never seen a better vinyl presentation than what SFART do, because they started off as a backlist label and they were taking old classics and making them beautiful, and they really care about vinyl. So any band who is really happy to just like record an album and then have some guy go, okay, here's some of the options for your record art. It's like, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you finding that person? In your head what this music should look like. Oh, you should. So I think maybe that's just me, but like, it's anathema to me that taking away those creative parts of the band and giving them to someone else. That's because they're not in the band. Maybe that's old-fashioned as well. And probably in the 70s it wasn't the case. You're right, it probably comes from punk rock. It's like Black Flag. Raymond Pettibon, who did all of the art for Black Flag, was Greg Ginn's brother, his little brother. And the art is so much a part of imagine Black Flag without that art. It's so integral to the band. Yep. And I think people underestimate the power of like posters, merch, art. It's not just a bit of extra cash for the band. It's like, that's also part of what you're doing creatively. Like, I can't allow any merch to go out from Green Lung that doesn't look sick, because it's part of the world we've created. I don't want to do like, a parody shirt with like a goat riding a unicorn or anything, because it would suck and it would ruin Green Lung. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. So that was a bit of a rant.
No, fair enough. I mean, you kind of segued into my next question, which was about your band mascot. And you talked about Eddie and Snaggletooth and all. So I have to get a reaction from you, and please correct me because I've read there are about 20 people with your band's mascot tattooed, and I've read it's either the goat or the goat wizard. So correct me on that. And
So
what was your reaction when you found out that people are getting it tattooed, man?
I mean, I remember thinking like when Richard did that, those little woodcut. I was like, Richard, could you do a woodcut for each song? So it'd be really cool. And he did. I put like Let the Devil In, like a goat rearing up on its hind legs. And he sent me that, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I should get that tattooed on me. And then maybe like a few months after Woodland Rights came out, someone on Instagram was like, I got Lil Goatee Boy tattooed on me. There's a guy called, I think it's called Jordan. He's a legend. If he's listening, hey Jordan. And I think he was a tattooist, and he tattooed it on himself. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, that's insanity. Because at this point, we were still a little band that no one knows about. And I was just like, that's insane. That's like such an amazing thing that like we put this art out into the world, and then someone's fucking tattooed it on themselves forever. And then the next one happens, and you're like, okay. And then another one and another one. And then you go to a show, and people are like, hey, rolling up their sleeve and showing you their like Goatee Boy tattoo. There's two characters. There's little Goatee Boy, who's just a goat. And then there's the guy on the front of Woodland Rights we call Goat Wizard. And he's also on the front of Black Harvest without any flesh on his face. And I think like I quite like the idea of the Goat Wizard guy, who's a representation of like wild nature and pre-Christian English weirdness. I like him as like our sort of mascot in a way. He's on a couple of t-shirts. He's on a parody Motorhead sort of Goat Wizard t-shirt. Like,
yeah, I love that one. I actually want to get that one.
Well, hopefully we'll make it out to India and play a show. That would be fucking amazing. Because yeah, I traveled in Mumbai and Goa and fucking went to Dharamshala and did a right hippie holiday in like Leh. Like have traveled a bit in India, and I had a mate in a band called Metastasis who are from London, who played some shows out in India and said it was like the time of their lives. So yeah. But yeah, that's the story of little Goatee Boy and the Goat Wizard. I'm not sure how they really relate yet, but I think there's a point in the band where you just stuff goes beyond you. It's not like there's a mythology there that is the fans are part of it and they feed into it, and that's the fun. Like that's like with Eddie in Iron Maiden, that was just a stupid zombie that was drawn on the first album. They didn't think anything of it, and then it becomes this character. So it always just sort of develops and gets weirder and weirder and goes beyond you.
Okay, so we've reached this point of the interview where I'm going to talk about live gigs. And you performed recently at the 20th edition of the Bloodstock Festival. Someone kind enough took a bootleg video and put it up on YouTube, and I was watching it, and I must say it looked like a lot of fun, right? Just being in there. But when I was also reading up, you guys were actually originally booked for it 2 years ago. So how did it feel like finally to be performing, and after 2 years, 18 months almost, performing live again?
Yeah, it was a really amazing thing. We'd done one live stream in that 18 months, which felt kind of like a gig to like 5 people. But that was the only time we played live. And actually, the last shows we played before lockdown, Joe, who's our current bassist, was just filling in for Andrew, our previous bassist. So he'd not really played a gig officially as a member of Green Lung. So, and we hadn't played These Are the Blind, Reaper Scythe. We hadn't played those songs live. It was amazing, man. It was almost like quite emotional. It was like, you're running on pure adrenaline, and it was the biggest show we've ever played in terms of the number of people there. It was like, more than a couple of thousand people there, and just you hear people singing along and en masse like that, and that's kind of how the songs were meant to be. They were meant to be big sing along fucking hooky stadium metal songs, and so it just feels like almost easier. And it sounds weird, but it's easier to play to like a couple of thousand people when they're singing along than it does to a half-filled pub of people who don't know the music. It's weird. And Bloodstock in general was amazing. We went to see Judas Priest afterwards, and we were off our tits, and yeah, it felt like it was over in about 15 minutes, but they actually played for like 2.5 hours.
Wow.
Fuck, now that's some stamina.
I know.
dude, like that guy, he's like 70, and honestly, Painkiller was like fucking note perfect. The guy is an absolute master. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hopefully, we get to.
Are you guys in lockdown in terms of gigs still in Mumbai, or?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, things are opening up slowly, but yeah, no gigs, no nothing of that sort, at least at the moment.
I think everyone's still rusty. The metal bands are kind of still rusty also, right?
Yeah, and plus I think like a year and a half in, I think everyone's done with live streams. They don't want to do that anymore either.
No, man, I feel that like live streams, it was cool like one time, but actually it's not the experience, is it? Like sitting there in your pants drinking a beer and watching a band on your laptop, you might as well just fucking just give up. It's just like
slap on headphones and listen to an actual fucking album instead.
But exactly, because there's such a gig is about noise and it hitting you in the chest, and about people around you, and about having a fun time. It like a live stream of a gig is just, a slightly wobbly version of what you can get on the record usually, unfortunately.
All right. Okay. Let's change tracks. You've played in Oak, right? And the rest of the band were in Dead Box Radio. What's the status of the other bands now that Green Lung has, I'm guessing, become the main band of sorts for everyone?
So yeah, I wasn't actually in Oak. That was Scott. I was sort of in between bands when we started Green Lung, so it's always been my main thing. But Oak carried on without Scott very well for like a couple of years. Weirdly, Scott played bass in Oak, which just is like hilarious to me because he's basically the best lead. He's the best lead guitarist. Honestly, he's the best lead guitarist in London, and it's just very funny that he was playing bass. But our mate Richard actually took over on the bass from Scott in Oak, and they played a bunch of shows, played Europe. Released a great final EP and then called it quits over lockdown, sadly. But I'm sure they'll go on to other things. Those guys are great. And Deadbox Radio, we actually took Matt originally, was from Deadbox Radio, and the bassist Andrew, and then John, who was the organist. So basically the whole band ended up, except for a guy called Mike, who's also our friend, who's now got another great band called Boarhead. So those guys are like, everyone's still going, but both those bands are now defunct. And I guess in the end, Green Lung did become like the main thing, and it was hard to sort of, when the momentum was there with Green Lung, I think those guys found it hard to fully dedicate themselves to those other projects. But I think all of us like loads of different music, and I'm sure that there'll be some Green Lung side projects at some point in the future. I'd be surprised if there wasn't.
Excellent. So before we wrap up, I have to ask you, what does the short-term future for Green Lung look like? And what does the long-term future for Green Lung look like? By long-term, let's peg it at, say, 3 years, and short-term, maybe, say, the next 6 months or so.
I think in short term, we want to tour this album as much as we can and play shows to as many people as we can. We spent such a long time locked indoors. We wrote what I think is a fucking great album. We're really psyched about it. It seems to be getting a good reaction. Second albums are hard, and they're really hard when you're in a pandemic and everything's gone mad and you've lost a band member. So to come through that was really great. And like these last shows have just been very validating in terms of like, yes, this is, you know, exciting, and the band is still sort of taking off. And yeah, like we've got Damnation Festival coming up, which is in Leeds, which is a great festival we always wanted to play, and I've been many times as a punter. And then early next year, we've got a European tour, which we're about to announce very soon. We've got some really big festival dates, including Mystic Festival with Mastodon and Opeth, which is going to be hype. We've got Sonic Blast Maledo in Portugal, which is, you know, Electric Wizard and some other bands are playing. So there's some really great European festival shows, plus a European tour, plus a second leg of our UK tour. There's some things I can't tell you about, which are coming up, which are super exciting. One of them is like a childhood dream of mine, which is a really great show we're playing. And then, yeah, I think probably there's the second half of next year. In the longer term, there's a big old gap there at the moment. And I want to keep a gap there because that gap is kind of hopefully album 3 refining and writing time. And, you know, my dream scenario would be that we can get something out in 2023. And who knows, but that's kind of where I'm at the moment. I think playing these shows, talking to people like you guys, just the enthusiasm with the band has just really G'd us all up, and it's really creatively got me going again. So yeah, much more to come.
Fingers crossed. Let's hope all of that happens.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's hope.
Yep. Plug time. Where can people find the band, listen to the songs, get some merch if they really find themselves really into it?
Sure thing. You can find us on Bandcamp. Is probably the best place to find us in terms of music. And we have sold out a lot of the vinyl copies we have. But if you can't find any vinyl on Bandcamp, you can find it on Svart Records website or on Amazon or any foul corporate behemoth that you care to purloin at records from. And you can get merch from Hello Merch, which is our merch company on both sides of the Atlantic. And if you're in India, probably it's best to buy it from the USA store. And really, yeah, like we're going to be out on the road. If you've got the opportunity to come and see us, come say hi. And yeah, thanks for listening, and thanks for your interest in the band and for supporting us. It's really nice to hear that we've made it to India, you know, and hopefully we'll get there physically at some point soon.
Yep.
Definitely. Yeah, maybe who knows, right? A stoner rock festival in India.
Fuck yeah, make it happen.
Yes, stoner rock is big in India. Yeah, it is.
Fly us out, man.
Alrighty. On that note, thank you for joining us, Tom. This was an absolute pleasure.
That was a pleasure. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
And thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in. I mean, keep in touch as always. We're at hornsupod.com and at Twitter at hornsupod.
I'm on Twitter at AsmoAni.
I'm at Trend Crusher.
Keep them horns up.
Horns up, guys.